I felt my face go completely still. Not the kind of still where you're trying to hold yourself together. The kind where something inside you just stops. Like a clock whose battery finally dies. My dad was standing at the head of the table, glass raised, smiling at my brother like he'd just won the Nobel Prize. And what he said next, in front of my aunts, my cousins, my brother's girlfriend, her entire family, was something I will never forget for the rest of my life. "We are so proud of the man you've become. You are everything we ever hoped for in a child. We just wish," and he paused here, actually paused, like he was savouring the words, "we wish you had been our only one." Everyone laughed. A few people shifted uncomfortably. My aunt looked at her plate. I didn't cry. I didn't stand up. I didn't throw my napkin down and walk out. I just picked up my fork and kept eating. But something changed that night, and by the following Monday, I had made a decision that would quietly unravel everything my parents thought was stable in their lives. I should back up. I'm the older one, by 4 years. My name is Claire, and my brother's name is Trevor, and if you grew up in a family like mine, you already know exactly how this story goes, before I even tell it. Trevor was the one my parents talked about at dinner. Trevor's grades, Trevor's baseball, Trevor's charm with the neighbours. I was just there, present, filling a seat at the table. I don't say that for sympathy. I'm not a person who wallows. I've spent most of my adult life building something that's entirely mine, on my own terms, and I'm proud of that. But it would be dishonest to tell this story without telling you what it felt like to grow up in that house. My mum used to do this thing where she'd introduce us to people. She'd say, "This is Trevor," big smile, hand on his shoulder, and then she'd gesture at me and say, "And this is his sister." Not my name. His sister, like I was a footnote. I told my college roommate that story once, and she thought I was exaggerating. I wasn't. My dad was more subtle about it, but the effect was the same. He coached Trevor's Little League team for 6 years. He came to exactly 2 of my high school cross-country meets. I counted 2 out of 23. I stopped expecting things after a while. That's just what you do. You recalibrate. You find your people elsewhere. You build your own life, and you learn not to need the approval of people who were never going to give it to you anyway. What I didn't do was cut them off. That was my mistake, I think. Or maybe not a mistake. Exactly. More like a choice I made out of love that never quite got repaid. I moved back to my hometown at 28. Not because I wanted to. I had a good job in Denver, a life I liked, a group of friends who actually knew my name and used it. But my mum called me in September of that year and told me my dad had been diagnosed with a heart condition. Not life-threatening, the doctors said, but serious enough that they needed to slow down. My parents had run a landscaping business together for almost 20 years. Not a huge operation. 12 employees, mostly residential clients in the suburbs outside of Columbus, Ohio. It was their retirement plan. Their identity. They talked about it the way other people talk about their children, which, given the circumstances, tracks. The problem was that neither of them could handle the administrative side of it anymore. My dad tired easily. My mum had never been good with numbers. They'd been running the back office on a combination of gut instinct and a bookkeeping system from 2009 that no one had updated since. I have a degree in business administration. I had been doing operations and financial management for a tech company for 3 years by then, and I was, apparently, the responsible one, so I said yes. I moved back. I took a remote consulting job that paid less than my dad the salary and told myself it was temporary. That was 2.5 years before the dinner. Here's what my parents didn't fully understand about what I did for that business. I rebuilt the entire back end from scratch, migrated everything to a real accounting platform, renegotiated contracts with their 3 biggest suppliers, found a new insurance policy that saved them over $4,000 a year. I identified 2 employees who had been padding their hours for months. Carefully, diplomatically let one go and restructured the other's role. I set up a proper payroll system. I got them onto a scheduling software that cut their no-show rate in half. In my first 8 months, I turned a business that had been slowly hemorrhaging money into one that was actually profitable again. Not just surviving, profitable. My dad would sometimes come into the office they had set up in their spare bedroom, glance at the spreadsheets over my shoulder, and say things like, "Looks good," or "Keep it up." My mum occasionally brought me coffee. Trevor, meanwhile, lived in Nashville. He worked in sales for a medical device company, made good money, called my parents every Sunday, and sent them a fancy fruit basket at Christmas. He visited twice a year. My parents described him to their friends as so successful, so driven. He had never once asked what I was doing for the business. The dinner was my parents' 35th wedding anniversary. They'd rented out a private room at a restaurant in Columbus. The kind of place with white tablecloths and a prix-fixe menu and servers who refill your water glass before you even notice it's empty. My aunts and uncles had driven in from Michigan. My dad's college friends were there. Trevor had come up from Nashville with his girlfriend Amber, who is perfectly nice and completely oblivious to the dynamics of this family, bless her heart. I had helped plan the dinner. I had made the reservation, confirmed the head count, handled the dietary restrictions, coordinated with the restaurant about the cake. I had also, 2 weeks earlier, quietly paid off an outstanding balance with one of my parents' equipment suppliers that would have caused a very uncomfortable conversation if it had gone unaddressed. I didn't tell anyone I did that. We were midway through the main course when my dad stood up. He gave a toast about marriage, about partnership, about building something together. It was actually a pretty good toast. Then he turned to Trevor and started talking about how proud they were of him. His career, his character, his maturity. My aunt was tearing up. Amber was squeezing Trevor's hand, and then came the line, "We just wish you had been our only one." I'll tell you what the room felt like in that moment. Have you ever been in a space where the air pressure seems to drop slightly? That's what it felt like. A few people laughed, nervous laughs, the kind that fill silence when no one knows what else to do. My cousin Madison caught my eye from across the table. She looked horrified. My dad sat down. The servers came to clear the plates. The conversation restarted, and my mother leaned over to me about 5 minutes later and said, quietly, "He didn't mean anything by it. You know how he gets." I nodded. I smiled. I ate my dessert. I drove home alone that night, and I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. I thought about the cross-country meet. I thought about "This is his sister." I thought about the equipment supplier balance I'd paid without being asked. I thought about the 2.5 years I had given to a business I didn't own, in a city I hadn't chosen to return to, for parents who apparently wished I didn't exist. I didn't feel angry, exactly. I felt clear. I went inside, opened my laptop, and started updating my resume. I want to be precise about what I did and did not do, because I'm not a vindictive person and I don't want to sound like one. I did not sabotage anything. I did not delete files or scramble the accounts or do anything to actively harm the business. I am not that person. What I did was give my parents 4 weeks' notice, professional, clear, in writing, that I would be stepping back from my role in the business. I cited personal career reasons. I offered to train a replacement and document all the systems I built. I was courteous throughout. My dad's response, in its entirety, was, "Okay, let me know what you need to wrap up." My mum called me that evening and asked if this was about the dinner. I told her honestly that it was one of several reasons I'd been thinking about this decision. She sighed and said, "You're being sensitive." I didn't argue. There was nothing to argue. I just said I'd have everything documented within the month, and I'd be in touch about the transition. I found a new job, back in operations, this time for a logistics company based in Cincinnati, hybrid schedule, better salary than Denver. I gave notice at my consulting job. I found an apartment. And then I did the thing I should have done a long time ago. I stopped. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a confrontation or any of the things you see in movies. I just redirected my energy. I stopped being available every time my mum called with a quick question about payroll. I stopped answering emails at 9 o'clock on Sunday nights about vendor invoices. I stopped rearranging my schedule for the business's emergencies. I let them figure it out. It took about 6 weeks. The first sign was a call from my mum in late March, about a month after I'd officially stepped back. She said the new person they'd brought in to handle the books, A part-time bookkeeper they'd found through a local agency had discovered some discrepancies and wasn't sure how to address them. "Could I just take a quick look?" I told her I was sorry, but I was in the middle of my transition and I wasn't able to consult on the business anymore. I said it gently. I meant it. She called twice more that week. I let both go to voicemail. In April, two of their larger clients, a property management company that had been with them for 6 years, and a homeowners association in a suburb north of Columbus, did not renew their seasonal contracts. I found out later that the proposal process had been mishandled. Nobody had followed up. Nobody had sent the updated pricing documents on time. These things had been my job. Without me doing them, they didn't get done. Those two contracts together represented about 30% of the business's annual revenue. In May, my dad called me for the first time since I'd left. He doesn't call me often. I think in 2.5 years I could count on one hand the number of times he'd reached out directly. He asked how I was doing, asked about the new job. We talked for a few minutes. And then he said things have been a little rocky with the business. I said I was sorry to hear that. He said we're managing. He didn't ask me to come back. I think he thought I would offer. I didn't. That summer, Trevor came up to Columbus for a long weekend. My mum had a small family dinner. Just the 4 of us, plus Amber. I came because I'm still their daughter and I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was just done subsidizing people who didn't see me. It was a strange evening. Quieter than usual. My dad looked tired. My mum had made pot roast, which is what she makes when she's stressed. Trevor, over dinner, mentioned that he'd been thinking about maybe investing in the family business someday. Getting involved. My parents' eyes lit up in a way I recognized. The Trevor effect, I'd always called it privately. That glow they got around him that they never quite produced for me. He asked a few questions about the financials. My mum looked at my dad. My dad said they'd been working through some restructuring. Trevor said, "Maybe I can take a look when I'm up here." Nobody asked me anything. I ate my pot roast. I asked Amber about her sister's new baby. It was fine. It was genuinely fine because here's what I'd learned in the months since the anniversary dinner. I had stopped needing them to see me. That need had been replaced by something quieter and more solid. The knowledge that I had done something real, that it had mattered, and that the absence of it was now making itself felt in every invoice they couldn't find and every client they couldn't retain. I didn't need credit. The work itself had given me something better than credit. It had given me proof. I found my people by the way. I want to say that because I think sometimes these stories end in a way that implies the only peace available is in isolation, in walking away and being alone with your dignity. That's not how it went for me. In Cincinnati, I met a woman at my new job named Becca who became my closest friend faster than I'd made a close friend since college. She was sharp and funny, and she had grown up with a younger sister who could do no wrong, and we understood each other in the specific, wordless way that only people who've lived the same thing can. I started running again. I'd let that go during the Columbus years. Too busy. Too tired. I found a running group that met on Tuesday mornings and Saturday afternoons, and those people became, over the course of a year, something that felt very much like a chosen family. I celebrated my 31st birthday with 12 people who genuinely wanted to be there. That had never happened before. I'm not being dramatic, it had genuinely never happened before. I'm not saying I don't think about my parents. I do. I think about them more than I wish I did, honestly. I wonder sometimes if my dad ever thinks about the cross-country meets. I wonder if my mum remembers saying "you're being sensitive" the night after her husband told a room full of people that my existence was a source of regret. I don't know the answers to those questions. I don't think I ever will. In October, almost exactly a year after the anniversary dinner, my mum called me on a Tuesday evening. I answered. She told me the business was being sold. Not failing exactly, they'd found a buyer. A larger landscaping company that wanted to acquire their client list and absorb their equipment. It wasn't a great deal, she said, but it was a deal. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "You did a lot for us." I don't know if we ever said that properly. I didn't say anything right away. I let that sit in the air between us. "Thank you," I finally said. "That means something to me." We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular, her book club, my running group, a cousin's engagement. When I hung up, I sat with the feeling for a while, trying to name it. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't relief exactly. It was something closer to completion. The feeling of a story arriving at a natural resting place. My dad never called to say anything similar. I don't expect he will. People rarely become different people just because the consequences finally catch up with them. He is who he is. I've stopped waiting for him to become someone else. Trevor, as far as I know, did not end up investing in the business. He visited for Christmas and was, by my mum's account, very supportive during the sale process. She mentioned this to me in a way that I think was meant to be a subtle dig, and then immediately changed the subject, which told me she knew it too. Here's what I want you to take from this. I am not a perfect person. I made choices that, in retrospect, I would make differently. I stayed too long. I gave too much to people who had told me, in 100 small ways, and one very large public way, that my contributions were invisible to them. I kept hoping that doing more would eventually make them see me. It didn't. It never does. And if you are the person in your family who does the unglamorous work, who handles the logistics, who shows up, who quietly keeps things running while someone else gets the credit, I want you to hear this clearly. Your worth is not determined by whether they acknowledge it. The work was real. The competence was real. The fact that they couldn't see it says everything about them and nothing about you. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to redirect that energy toward people who can actually receive it. You are allowed to build a life that doesn't require anyone's permission. The dinner where my father said what he said, I used to replay it in my head and feel that drop in air pressure all over again. Now when I think about it, mostly what I feel is grateful. Not to him, not for what he said. Grateful that it was clear enough that I finally couldn't pretend not to see it. Some people need that moment. The moment where the thing that was always true is said out loud in front of witnesses. I needed that moment. And when it came, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I finished my dessert, drove home, and started building the life I should have been building all along. How would you have handled it? And wherever you're watching from, tell me, because I want to know how far this kind of story reaches. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that anniversary dinner. Not in a mystical way. I don't believe the universe was keeping score on my behalf. I just believe that actions have weight, and eventually that weight lands somewhere. My dad made a choice that night. He chose, in front of 30 people, to say out loud what he had communicated in 100 quieter ways throughout my entire life. And in doing that, he didn't create a new reality. He just finally described the one that had always existed. That was almost a gift, honestly. It's hard to keep pretending something isn't true once it's been said at a dinner table with white tablecloths and a Prish menu. What I did afterward wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I think the word revenge implies something hot and intentional. What I did was simply stop absorbing consequences that were mine. I stopped being the person who caught things before they fell. I stepped back, and what happened next, the lost contracts, the bookkeeping chaos, the sale, that was just the natural outcome of a system that had been running on one person's labour while pretending otherwise. I didn't break anything, I just stopped holding it together. There's something I keep coming back to when I think about Claire. The version of me who moved back to Columbus and quietly rebuilt an entire business for people who introduced her as his sister. That Claire was not weak. I want to say that clearly. It takes real intelligence to do what she did. Real discipline, real competence. The mistake wasn't in having those qualities. The mistake was in directing them entirely toward people who had already decided she didn't matter. That's the thing about being the capable one in a family like mine. Your capability becomes the thing they rely on without acknowledging. You become load-bearing in a structure that doesn't have your name on it anywhere, and because you're competent, because you're responsible, because you were raised to see problems and fix them, you keep fixing. Long past the point where it makes any sense. What I had to learn, and it took me longer than I'd like to admit, is that competence without boundaries isn't a virtue. It's just a different kind of disappearing. I was invisible when I was failing to meet their expectations. I was equally invisible when I was exceeding them. The invisibility was never about my performance. It was about their perception. And I could not fix that. No amount of saved supplier contracts was going to fix that. The version of me in Cincinnati, the one who has a running group and a best friend named Becca, and celebrated her 31st birthday with 12 people who wanted to be there. That version exists because I finally stopped trying to earn something that was never going to be given. That's the whole story, really. Not my dad's toast. Not the sale of the business. Just that I stopped trying to earn what should have been freely given. And in that stopping, I found out what I was actually worth. Not to them, but to myself. That turns out to be enough. More than enough, actually.